But Tuesday, September 6th, a town board meeting at 7 o'clock will follow. We are pleased to have a special presentation from Code Studio and the Planning Department, expected to take about 45 minutes. And after that, we will go into our agenda items for an hour and give the clerk an hour to work on the consent agenda. There's also an executive session in there somewhere on a legal issue.
All right.
So with that, Dan?
Good afternoon. Dan Howard. I'm with the Town Planning Department. Before I begin, I'd just like to point out we have a couple of members of the project working committee, and I think I got some folks from the technical committee here as well that are working with us on this project. You know, Councilmember Popowich is on our working committee. We have Del Giuliani, who's the chair of the working committee. Rick Gillert's the chair of the technical committee. Gary Black is a member of the technical committee. I think I saw Brian. Brian's on the technical committee. We have Duncan Black from the working committee, Dave Chiazza from the working committee, and am I missing anybody? I think that's it for the folks that are on our working committee. I'd like to thank you for providing this opportunity for us to address this project with you, give you a little bit of a status. It's been almost exactly 6 months since we started the project back in March, and so we have some things to tell you. And I'm going to introduce Lee Einsweiler, who's here from Code Studio, based in Austin, Texas, who will review the progress we've made thus far, discuss some of the upcoming activities we have planned in the near future, and we're really here to seek your insights on what you hear today and maybe what you've heard up to this point. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lee.
Thank you, Dan. And there's slides. Love it. Next slide, if you would. I'd like to take just a moment and introduce our team. Code Studio is a planning and zoning implementation firm. We focus heavily on full community zoning codes, but we've also recently begun to do a lot of just area-specific zoning work. Our big dog client right now is the City of Los Angeles. That keeps us busy about half of our time. We're out there once a month. It's a 5-year project, so we're about halfway through that one as well, but that one will take a little longer. We're working in exurban Atlanta with Sandy Springs. That's where the Perimeter Center is located, if you've ever been down there or looked at that. They're a booming community and a bit of a contrast to upstate New York, I'd have to say. We're working in the stockyards to provide new zoning and design guidelines and actually some historic preservation work to protect the stockyards on into the future, hopefully for the next 100 years. In addition to our firm, we've got Home Run Creative on the team. They are experts in public outreach. They're located right here. They understand your local outlets, and they've been helping us get the word out about the project and share with the community in general. Next slide, please. So I myself have been working in planning and zoning for about 30 years now. And in fact, for a former employer, I did the last reformat of your existing code many years ago. Hopefully that had some influence on the selection team for this project. That was more of a reformat than anything else. This has a deeper rethink in it than that prior work, and we're kind of excited about being able to come back to a place we already know and help them think a little bit more deeply about what they're doing. Next slide. So this project has a substantial history. Your comprehensive plan, which was adopted a number of years ago, provided a conceptual land use plan shown in that little image there. You're supposed to have memorized that so you don't actually have to see that one. I know you spend all your time with the conceptual land use plan when you think about zoning. In the process of preparing that plan, a hierarchy of commercial centers was developed. Traditional centers, places like Eggertsville and Snyder, neighborhood centers, the kind of thing that would be at the scale that would have a pharmacy maybe associated with it. Dodge, where's the good pharmacy? Dodge and Hopkins is an example of that scale of center. Full-on community centers, this is where a grocery and other larger footprint buildings would be. And then the regional retail that you've got, most of which in your case is on Transit Road and Niagara Falls Boulevard. So, and right at the freeway. That hierarchy was really based on the market role of the centers. And it didn't really talk much more than sort of looking at whether you had adequate room for all of those kinds of commercial activity in town. And the answer is definitely yes. You, in fact, are an importer of people to use your commercial centers. So you are actually bringing people to town to shop here. The comprehensive plan didn't really say anything about the urban form of these centers. It really just kind of said, you know, some are small, some are medium, some are large. Next slide. Then when you try to implement the comprehensive plan, if we were trying to follow that plan, we find that our toolkit is a little bit limited and perhaps not as modern as it ought to be. So centers at various scales are using the same zoning district. The GB district is everybody's personal favorite. In using that district, they often are required to get variances in order to achieve a good development, something that the town actually wants to see. They're encouraged to actually ask for variances in order to get the kind of development that they're looking for. In addition, you've got one tool that was supposed to help those traditional nodes, the traditional neighborhood business overlays, and they've really not been used. They didn't generate the kind of activity that we sort of thought they might at the time they were originally developed. And finally, the zoning code itself also needs some technical amendments. Could use some more help on user friendliness. We've gotten better in the production of documents. The use of graphics especially is something that's much stronger now than it was when we did that one in the past. It could be much clearer in order to provide for a more consistent implementation and administration. It's really difficult to administer an ordinance when you have multiple parties engaged, the building department, the planning department, et cetera, and they're reading the same language and they're not getting to the same place. So that's a continuing challenge in your zoning code today. So during the course of this project, while we are mostly focused on the centers, in the background, we're going to do this technical cleanup for user friendliness and for consistency and interpretation. Next slide. So in addition to that, I wanted to mention a little bit, we have some of the best partners you've got in New York, which is NYSERDA. The amount of money that is being spent on good thinking in communities across the state by NYSERDA is pretty amazing. And you guys won a Cleaner, Greener Communities grant, which you are matching. You are funding it yourself with some cash, but a substantial role here is the involvement of your staff. And so that in-kind contribution is also critically important to making this project work. Next slide. In order to successfully work our way through the issues associated with this project, we asked that there be established both a working committee, a sort of blue ribbon sounding board for us, some folks that we could talk to who could represent the broader community, but be a manageable scale. So a conversation could be held about draft products, et cetera. There are planning board members, there are ZBA members, we clearly have a town board member, we've got community representatives, including the development community, we've got homeowners. There's really a breadth of perspectives on that group. And one of the key things is that for the most part, that group is intended just to provide their insight. There's no reason that we are pitting one against another in any of the conversations. We sort of want to hear all of the stuff from each of the perspectives to see whether we, with our technical expertise, can try to resolve or bridge any conflicts that happen to show up. In addition, we've got a technical committee that provides our technical direction. That includes the town staff principally, but it is supplemented as well by some of the regional planning representatives. The IDA sits on the technical committee, right? And who else is the region? Oh, NYSERDA themselves. Yeah, so the university, et cetera. So a wide variety of people providing pure technical insight into our work products. So both of those committees are working with us. That's where we've been getting most of our answers from prior to today. That's why you've not been seeing us. We're really here today just to kind of brief you, make sure that you know where everything's going, and that hopefully all you're hearing is good things about the project. So next slide, please. So the overall project is broken up really into these 5 big steps. The initiation of the project, which has been completed, some analysis, which is mostly completed to date, and then there will be a comprehensive plan amendment to try to categorize these centers in a way that is more useful in thinking about the future land use for the city. And then a zoning amendment as a companion to that. That zoning amendment can be as simple as just putting the text in place and in the future allowing applicants to ask for those new districts, or better yet, we hope to actually prescribe for you a package of zoning that you will think is good enough to actually replace much of the zoning in those areas. And that's really what we're working on, this companion plan amendment and zoning amendment that would set up the centers to really blossom. The final step, of course, is adoption. And I want to point out during the adoption process, not only do we have the typical planning board and town board review, but we have a training obligation in our contract. And we'll be doing some education, some lessons learned for other people. That is one of the steps that NYSERDA has asked us to help transfer this knowledge to other communities surrounding you. So next slide, please. Same slide, except in this case, some dates put on it. So the plan amendment is anticipated by the end of the year, the zoning by about the first quarter of next year, and by the second quarter of next year, we should be bringing it forward for your consideration. So just to give you a general sense of the schedule. Next slide. So to date, some of the key pieces we've finished: a public outreach plan, which guides our public outreach throughout the project. A project website at imagineamherst.com is available. That's where all of the project documents go, meeting minutes, all of the kinds of things that people may want to follow as they track the history of this project, or if they get engaged late in the project, they can go back and figure out what's happened before their engagement. Next slide. So some of the analysis. To start with, we looked at the comprehensive plan, and we looked real hard in the comprehensive plan to understand how it dealt with the variety of centers in town. And in fact, one of the key things is that that map really doesn't tell everybody which kind of center they are looking at in which places. So the centers aren't necessarily directly keyed to one of those hierarchical types that you've got today. And the future character of those centers is a bit undefined, except as to their economic role. So we have centers, we have a framework for thinking about them, but they're not really tightly matched together in a way, especially that the public can understand. The center types clearly need better illustration in terms of what do we want here? What are we expecting? What does the planning level of information tell us about what we would like to achieve? One of the questions is, given the mixed-use activity centers and your commercial centers and the corridors and some of the other kinds of things that are in the plan, do we maybe have too many types? Could we simplify this whole hierarchy a little bit, make it a little bit more intuitive for people so that they would understand as rezoning is occurring over time, or as projects come forward, they would understand a little more where things are supposed to be in town and whether things are right-sized for their location. Next slide. We've also looked at the zoning and its ability to implement the plan. And the fact of the matter is, right this minute, only one zoning district can create a true mixed-use activity center. And that's your TND district. That is your best district for generating that. You've got it on the ground in one place in the community. And it's probably not appropriate as written for very many other places. So it's not necessarily that we have one great tool and we should go use it everywhere. In fact, we don't have great tools for much of the area. Many developers find themselves kind of zoning shopping, if you will. Gee, this has a bigger sign in it. I want that district. This one has 2 more uses that I want, so I want this one. They're looking for a little more flexibility maybe in terms of siting their building. And so they're actually asking you to rezone to districts that perhaps you're not fully comfortable putting in place. The fact of the matter is the zoning itself has very few urban form rules about how buildings relate to the street. They do generate the right amount of required parking and some things like that, but not a whole lot of landscaping at present. And so some of your urban form is suffering because the requirements aren't high enough. Next slide. So the first thing that we have done in order to get prepared for a little more conversation about this is to look at your centers and suggest perhaps a different way to think about how they might be organized. So what we were looking for is centers that can be targets for redevelopment. So the likelihood of redevelopment is an important characteristic of one of the centers we want to work with in these early phases. Because if it's something that's just been built, we're not going to change much about it, right? It's not going to morph and become something new. We also were looking for transferability of the results. Not necessarily a center that is completely unique within the town, but actually one in which there might be 3 or 4 or 5 places that might use the same tools to manage the zoning in those places. So in looking around, we really felt there were 5 distinct types that we could identify in looking at all of the centers throughout the community. One of the key kinds of retail, especially that you have, is these deep, large parcels, mostly along Transit and Niagara Falls Boulevard. The deep, large parcels give you the most flexibility in siting, in scale, the most options for what you can do with your development. Things are the easiest on a big site. In contrast to that, you have a number of settings, a lot of corridors with very shallow commercial parcels butted right up against a single-family development, right? And those shallow parcels need their own kinds of rules that are going to be quite different from the rules you can use on a deep parcel. You can get almost no transition in on that back edge on those shallow parcels. So what does that mean about the scale of development and the amount of activity that you want to see there? So that'll be part of the conversation. You have some traditional nodes, and again, Eggertsville, Snyder, but Swarmville, some other possible traditional nodes throughout the community. You have some newer suburban nodes, mostly up towards the northeast, Hopkins and Dodge being a great example of one of those. And then you have the edge of Williamsville, especially this western side, where because of the access from the interstate, you're seeing a lot of activity. As activity is going on within the village of Williamsville itself, it's becoming very attractive in between Williamsville and the interstate system. So we kind of broke things down into those 5 distinct types of commercial areas. And next slide. One of the things that we wanted to do in trying to work on thinking about new zoning for those areas was try to help both our working committee and the general public understand these kinds of centers a little bit more and understand the language of the planning and zoning that goes with that so that they can talk to us in a way that is the most useful to us. And so in order to do that, we sent the working committee out on a tour of these centers. I think they really enjoyed it. You can ask Dal about it when you get a chance here. Giving them a chance to actually see things the way that the planner might, look, here's a really shallow parcel, and look, the building sits almost at the back, and there's no space at all for landscaping, and there's a rickety fence instead of a nice wall. There's, whatever there is going on out there, they could go and actually have a look at how those function today, both new centers and some older centers. So that tour has been very helpful in getting people up to speed. Next slide. Out of the total set of centers in the community, we're going to engage in a very intensive exercise in 2 weeks' time that we're calling a design charrette. And that will include these 6 pilot centers. And you actually have a map there at the back of your packet of the general locations of those 6 centers. Those ones are the ones that we selected with the help of the working committee. They have been vetted by the planning board as well, and they help us set up a way to test the zoning concepts, new ideas that might be applicable in the community, using these real locations. Without real locations, right, we're just forming something off in the clouds there. We might as well be over at UB on the drafting tables, cooking up big, deep ideas. We need some real answers for real places. So to start with, these are the 6 places that we're going to work with. And you can see them right there, Northtown Plaza, the west end of the village, Eggertsville and Snyder, a piece of transit road, and an intersection up in Gettsville. So that set of places is going to be the target for our week-long activity, which then we hope translates into being able to use the tools that seem to apply in those places in other places, so that we have a toolkit that can actually handle all of the commercial centers in the entire town. Next slide, please. So one more step that we've taken to date is to identify some precedent examples from other communities. And this document is available, will be posted on the web shortly, allows people to follow along with real built things in other places that are like the kinds of possibilities that you have here. So some of these happen to be deep sites, some happen to be shallow sites, some are like the edge of the village. There are examples of each of the kinds of places, but they are real development projects that the marketplace has produced somewhere, for the most part, in the Northeast. We're going to work on developing some brief case studies of those so that we can bring them to life with some imagery, so that people will understand during the course of the charrette what those places might be like, start to give people a little food for thought about what might be possible in the town. So next slide, please. The most important thing we wanted to mention today is the upcoming public participation design charrette. This is a model of working that I suspect you may not have used before. It is a very popular model when we cross over between design issues and regulatory issues. Why is that? Because in order to do really good regulation, you've got to know what you're regulating. You have to know how tall things should be, how wide they should be, how close to the lot line, what kinds of building materials, where's the parking lot go, what's the landscaping look like. All of those design ideas are going to be discussed in talking about a toolkit for future design here. Now, this is the charrette schedule. There are some key times when the public will be engaged during the course of this. They're welcome to watch and engage during the entire experience from Saturday through Wednesday night. But there are some key times. If I was picking them in priority order, number 1 would be Saturday morning. Saturday morning is a full morning commitment, admittedly, but it is the most important thing that the public can do to help us both understand these centers and get engaged in helping describe what the future of them might be. So this is a hands-on workshop. In classic fashion, as planners and designers love, we're going to flop a big map on the table of the centers, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what their strengths and weaknesses are today and what they could be in the future based on the kinds of precedents that we've seen for those kinds of places, and talk about what might be acceptable and what the challenges of establishing some of those kinds of, whether it's new uses or new forms of development might be. What happens at the transition between this property and the back lot line where the single family is? What happens where the traffic comes out onto the main roadway? What happens in all those circumstances surrounding these developments? That's the start of a conversation on Saturday morning. In the afternoon, we're actually going to invite people from each of the specific centers to come. They each get a 1-hour time slot there, so that people from the immediate surrounding area will be sure to get their own time with the design team to comment. The design team then works in an open design studio on Sunday. We're taking over part of the Harlem Road Community Center for that. So you'll have access. The public is welcome to come at any point in time. The design team will be mostly brainstorming on Sunday, trying to come up with some conceptual ideas that are worth testing on the individual sites, are worth actually drawing out and checking to see whether they're physically possible on the sites that have been identified. On Monday, we'll continue to work on that. In the background on Monday and Tuesday are going on a series of technical meetings. These would be meetings with specific focus groups. Some of those might include the folks who are most concerned about environmental issues, the folks who are in the development community and want to speak with us, folks who are in the design community, engineers, architects, landscape architects. Each of those groups will get a targeted time to come talk to us about the ideas that we're thinking about at that point in time. There are 2 chances for the public to come at lunchtime. These are called Lunch and Learns. They're a brown bag event. Bring your lunch and come on in. So if you happen to be close enough to town to be able to see those, inside the studio we'll run a little presentation. I'm going to do the first one on form-based codes on Monday so that people can understand that tool a little bit better before some of the big ideas come out. And on Tuesday, Dave, and help me with Dave's last name. Versell. Dave Versell will be here talking about his market analysis he's conducting on behalf of the town. So we'll get a chance to learn a little bit more about those 2 ideas if you drop in at lunch those 2 days. In addition then, the idea of a charrette is to iterate, is to actually revise the work based on comments as you go along. So on Monday, starting in the afternoon, downtown here at the Wyndham, we're going to run a session that will cover all of the centers in the afternoon. Then we're going to break that down, and we're actually going to take it out for an evening session, same materials, but broken up specifically into the 6 centers. We don't have all of those locations pinned down, but if you look on the back of your sheet that has the charrette schedule, you'll see where those are proposed to be held if you look at the section on public open houses there. So those open houses will give people a chance to see the drawing that has been done to date, to hear about the concepts, to hear about what happened last Saturday if they couldn't come on Saturday, and to begin to get engaged in the project. The design studio stays open for the next day and a half. We close it about noontime, midday on Wednesday, so that we can finish our final production and get ready for the show. And Wednesday night, we'll be right here in Town Hall presenting our findings from the course of the week. So the design work that has been done, the proposed hierarchy of the centers, the way that we think the new zoning might work, might all be ready for presentation that night. So if I had to pick things in order, in priority order for the general public to come to, it'd be the hands-on workshop, the closing presentation, then the drop-in open house. So those would be my top 3. Beyond that, you're welcome to get engaged at any point in time. The Open Design Studio, you can drop in there at any point in time, talk about a particular issue for your property and how these ideas might apply there, or to a property that neighbors you, or to your neighborhood center. You'll get a chance to do any of that. We'll always have someone available in the design studio to talk to. You can see the sausage being made, as it were. Next slide. So I also want to help you guys understand what your role during this week of the 23rd to the whatever 28th. First off, and the most important, get the word out. The best thing we could do is pack the house for these events. The more people, the merrier. Okay? Love to have the public join us. So helping us get the word out that this is an important element, and it's going to lead to new thinking in the comprehensive plan, it's going to lead to new thinking for new zoning, would be important. Secondly, if you're willing and can spare the time, just like any other citizen, we'd love you to engage during the charrette. So if you can come one of those times, if you can drop through the design studio at some point and give us your thoughts, we are open to all of that. And of course, we don't want you all showing up at once without us having noticed that you're showing up, so don't do that. But if you could work among yourselves about sort of, having a couple of you come to some of these events throughout the course of this, we'd really appreciate it. The schedule and things for the design charrette will be posted on the website, so you can go to imagineamherst.com and grab that schedule of events there. We're still pinning down one of the locations, and then the final version of the schedule will be posted. Next slide. So just to let you know what happens after that week-long event, we're going to prepare a summary of that workshop for people who are not engaged in that, something that we can post on the web and share with people. We're going to finish up our technical assessment of the existing regulations to make sure that we do truly understand where the challenges in the existing regulations are and what needs fixing in this next round of drafting. We're going to get agreement on those with the working committee and the technical committee, and then we'll begin drafting. We're going to prepare that draft plan amendment, the zoning technical amendments, those pure usability and clarification amendments, and then the new zoning for the centers. All of that gets prepared in about the same package. And then we'll move on to the adoption, public review, legal review, planning board review, town board adoption, some training and education along with that. And last slide. So with that, we just simply like to confirm that we're headed in the right direction. We'd be glad to answer any questions. Staff is here with me if it's something more in-house that needs to be responded to. They're here to help me respond to questions as well.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll ask the town board if they have any questions first, and if we have time, I'd love to go to the audience. Debbie, go ahead.
I have just a couple of questions.
Sure.
First of all, I am concerned about what you said about respect to the open meetings law, and certainly we want to be respectful of that.
Yes.
But I have not been a part of this process, although I was able to go on one of the bus tours, which was very informative. So I don't know really what my schedule is yet, but I would hope to be able to attend your charrettes, all this information. And now I have to be concerned that we don't have three of us at the same time. So I'm concerned about that as an issue.
We can do a couple things. One, of course, you're allowed to have a meeting as long as you notice it. So we can have you all there at the same time, provided we provide adequate notice. So that would be part of the answer. So for example, if you all want to come to the closing presentation, we should just figure out what kind of notice we have to provide and make sure you can all come. Otherwise, I would suggest you can come individually at any time when it says Open Design Studio, and you'll get a chance to talk with someone without necessarily the expectation that one of your other board members will be there. And as long as you've all talked with each other a little bit in advance, perhaps we can work out the ability to all come at certain points in time, or as long as it's less than the total, then you're welcome at any time.
Well, I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Also, specifically, the examples of the center types,
Yes.
you call them traditional, neighborhood, community, regional. To me, those all seem to be examples that stem to types of businesses. So where would residential houses fit in? Because it used to be residential, business, industrial types of districts. So where would residential neighborhoods fit in to this format that you are trying to describe?
So our project is really only dealing with one part of that. So the residential districts are not part of the project except for residential activity within the centers themselves. So this would be residential above commercial in a mixed-use setting, for example. That would be included. But single-family neighborhoods and other areas and pure industrial areas, pure office areas even for the moment, are not included in the scope of this project. It's focused solely on the designated center types that are already identified in the comprehensive plan. So we're not touching the zoning for residential neighborhoods. We're not touching the zoning for industrial areas or office areas. We are looking at the commercial districts and the mixed-use activity centers.
Okay, and then just one more question. You said that the examples you're going to be using are from the Northeast. Are there any examples from around here that people?
So the closest one we found, and it's a good one, and we're kind of excited to have found it, is actually in Rochester. They are few and far between. As you know, most of Buffalo's very interesting activity recently has been adaptive reuse, and you simply haven't got a Larkin administration building here to revitalize. So we don't have those same choices. So we've done a fair amount of research, but we are definitely open to hearing about more good projects that have happened around the region that are worth looking at. We should be talking about either infill, new buildings that went into an old setting, that would be acceptable kinds of projects, or complete redevelopment, something where, you know, they've kind of just scraped everything that was there and rethought it and built something wholly new. Those are kind of the two key kinds of projects we're interested in. And if you happen to know of one that we didn't put on the list, we'd love to hear about it. You could simply share that with the planning staff and it will get to us.
Okay, and I guess one more question. Sure. The public, the residents of the town of Amherst, they will be able to feel welcome to go to any of these sessions?
And they are the target of that whole exercise. So yes, I hope to make them feel welcome.
Thank you very much.
Ramona, and then Stephen, and then Fran, just to give you guys
Okay.
adequate advance notice.
All right. Thank you. Yes, I am the liaison from the town board to the committee, and managed to attend all the meetings and go on the bus tour not once but twice, once in June and once in July. I found everything very informative. The presentation that was given to the public before the bus tour in July, I would think that would be a presentation that the working committee should see sometime, because it was different than what the working committee saw in June. I feel you've been very responsive. The planning department, I know on the locations of the different places for the charrette, I had some concerns about one thing, and the planning department was receptive to my suggestion, and so some things were changed. So I feel like I've had input into the process so far,
Great.
Which I find valuable. And I believe that the working committee and several of the members, I see Frank Masters here too, that from the homeowners, that we have been working well together. You could see on the votes that we took for determining these centers, there was a different combination every time when we took the votes. So I found that interesting as well. Again, the concerns about these centers with buttressing neighborhoods, the transition that is very important, I think, to many of the residents and neighborhoods in the town, that has to be definitely addressed. So things that have happened in the past won't happen in the future. And that's where I think that this can be a proactive experience for the town. But so far, it's been a positive experience.
Thank you for that.
Well, first of all, thank you again for coming in today. I think that this is very informative, and as our planning director has said, this is probably the largest project that we've attempted to handle in quite some time. And so it's very important that we do this step by step and go through it. I got a couple questions, points, whatever, to go through. You mentioned the town board's roles in helping get the word out and engaging the citizens during the charrette, but I think that probably a bigger, more important role is what you highlighted on the last page, which is the town board adoption, which is probably going to be the biggest part of this, because if we don't adopt this, then we just spend a lot of time and effort for not. So I think it's very important that the town board fully understands what's going on here, and we're talking about a fundamental change in the way we're doing zoning from use-based to form-based, which is, I don't know how well everybody understands use-based to begin with, but forgetting everything that we knew about use-based and switching to a form-based is a big step. And I mean, I'm hoping that beyond today that there's going to be additional work sessions like this where you're going to be able to make sure we fully understand the changes, because you touched on something about a change in the process of how we would approve projects. And I mean, you didn't really go into that very much today, but I mean, right now we have a process where you go to the planning board, you go to the zoning board of appeals, you go to the town board on a rezoning or for larger project, et cetera. But it sounds like there may be changes, and obviously I think that it's very important that we understand how all that goes, and so I'm hoping that this will be an important part, because the last thing I want to have is a public hearing on this and we approve it without really understanding what is going on, which is gargantuan. Going back to the point that Councilmember Buckeye mentioned, I mean, it's my understanding is, for as far as open meetings, if you have a public forum that council members attend, that doesn't necessarily count as a meeting as long as we're not making decisions at this forum. So I don't know that there's any limitation on council members attending these events. Certainly, they're open to the public, and I expect lots of people from the public and the press to be attending them. But I hope that's not an issue, but certainly.
I hope it's
hope it
not an
isn't
issue as
either.
well. So we'll check into it to make sure it's not an issue.
Thank you.
The selections of the nodes, so the map you gave us with the A, B, C, D, E, F, I'm assuming these go along with the deep, large parcel, shallow quarter parcel, Williamsville Edge, traditional node, suburban node, office park.
Yes.
So, and you selected those based on, I'm looking back at your May 17th memo. So you selected that based on criteria of how relevant they were, how, the reason I ask is because it just seems like in some cases, like for example, for the small lots, which I think is what you have, Transit Road south of Maine, I mean, I just can't help but wonder why you didn't use the Niagara Falls Boulevard, Bailey, Main Street area, which we spent a lot of time with our live-work districts and specifically addressing that problem, which how you redeveloped these small lots. And so I was kind of curious why you picked one over the other, and
So a couple of things. First off, we didn't want to take on too many of your prior politically charged issues. So if you just look at the physical form, if we get the right answer for the ones we're going to look at, we'll be able to apply it in those places, I believe, provided that the politics of it can be worked out, which is a whole separate question. So, for example, we avoided the golf course redevelopment. You want to talk about the most redevelopable parcel in town, it's ready to go. Let's build something, right? On the other hand, there's, or the gun club, there are immense long-standing controversies over some of those sites. And the discussion that we would have about good urban form and good zoning, which is supposed to be happening a little bit generically, would get completely captured by those conversations. So some of this is, I will openly admit, political avoidance of substantial controversy. The one exception to that, because we felt we absolutely have to stick our noses into it, is the area between the interstate and the village, especially the question of height, because that one the community needs to resolve in a planning conversation and not on a case-by-case basis as all the
I'm
new
going to get right
projects
back
come
to that
through.
point in a second, but as long as you brought up Westwood and the gun club site, so presumably though, these, the six that you selected would apply to this
Yes.
type of, so a project, if something were to happen there.
Yes.
So just out of curiosity, what do you look at as being the template for the process that might be applied in those situations?
Those two happen to be deep large. I mean, there's lots of room on those parcels for transitions. There's lots of room for change in land use. There's lots of room for mixed uses. There's lots of space on both those sites. The shallow parcels one was a real challenge. I mean, we struggled whether we should grab a piece off of Millersport, whether we should be grabbing Bailey. We looked a lot at Bailey. And in the end, we were looking for a little geographic diversity. So we ended up reaching over to Transit Road, probably as much as anything, to make the people in that portion of the community feel like they had something near them that they should go talk about.
Well, I think before you mentioned that ideal targets were ones that were ripe for redevelopment, which,
Yes.
not surprisingly, I think you have an abundance of in the Eggertsville-Snyder area, so it wouldn't have been surprising to see most of your selections there. But going back to the height, so one of the concerns that I have is when we first talked about this, how long ago was it, a year, 2, 3 years ago? There was a lot of discussion about context-sensitive zoning, which I'm probably going to misrepresent and whatever, misexplain. But my understanding of that always was that our zoning code, as you kind of said, that one size fits all, doesn't take into account when you have GB that is right next to residential or GB that's in the heart of other GB. You know, if we have 6-story buildings all around it versus 1-story, 2-story houses around it. So that's kind of the way I understand it. So, I mean, my bigger concern isn't necessarily how we deal with mixed use, but how we set up the rules for when you border residences. What are we doing to make sure that we are not harming the residential neighborhood? People have a certain, you know, and again, I don't want to go into the controversial issues either, but yes, we have had plenty of situations where people get very upset about a specific project, but it meets the code, or it meets the code after we do, you know, 2, 3, 4 dozen different variances for it. So
I think that transitions like that, we'll be looking at 3 components at least in resolving those. The first and best is changing the land use gradually. And that's the trouble with shallow parcels, is you can't. Right, you have to change it instantly on the back lot line. But that's one of the ideas. So the way that use occurs, then the way that mass and scale occurs, the bulk of the buildings and whether they have to step back away from the neighborhood, whether the bulk is brought out to the busy street instead of on the back side of the property, all of those questions. And finally, then the kinds of mitigating elements, things like walls, landscaping, you know, all those things, even, you know, space, just pure buffers. So we'll be looking at all those tools and what kinds of combinations have to be pulled together to resolve these different settings. Because the setting in the narrow, shallow lot is going to be a very different answer than what you could do at Northtown Plaza, which has no immediate single-family neighbors, et cetera.
okay, and then I'll just ask one more question because I have lots of other business to do today. But so moving away from use-based zoning. So right now we want to limit where a strip club is located in our town. We do that through use-based zoning. How does that get affected in form-based?
Just lobbing those softballs over the plate.
Just trying to make it easy for you.
I appreciate it. So the simple answer is, while there is a lighter touch and a more consolidated approach to use, it doesn't go away. So especially the hot button ones like you're talking about will continue to be regulated. But as an example, you might say something, instead of saying, you know, butcher, baker, tinker, tailor, all of those things, right, in this long list that makes for a very long use table, you can say things like retail, sales, and service, right? And then you can put in there a whole variety of things. Now, you have to be careful when you're doing that. Years ago, we always had to pull out tattoo shop. Now everybody's daughter has a tattoo. So tattoo shops are just like nail salons. They're everywhere. So the way we think about uses is changing, but re-looking at those packages of use is definitely part of that conversation. You will still be regulating use. There will still be a table with allowed uses by district. Some kinds of things won't be allowed, perhaps in the smallest of districts, because they just have a scale that just doesn't fit in. You don't want to cram one of whatever that is into Eggertsville or Snyder. On the other hand, maybe it isn't scale. Maybe it's something else about the use and something we can mitigate. So we might have new use standards to try to mitigate the impact of whatever that use is. So we'll be working through that whole variety, but you will continue to regulate use. We are just packaging in more form at the same time.
Thank you very much.
Fran?
Just two comments. One is I did attend the tour, and the presentation before was very helpful, because when I had to go out to the various locations, I really realized what I should be looking for. So that was very important to keep that and for people to see that presentation.
Let me ask you, we've been thinking about trying to post the little video from that and then to post a self-guided version of the tour on the website. Do you think that would be useful to people? Do you think people would engage with that if we went through the brain death of getting it together and getting it posted?
I would hope so, because it really was informative. And like I said, the presentation before really helped me to know what, because I'm not an architect, I'm not,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, to what I should be looking for when I came to each location. So I would think that would be great, because we could reach out to more of the public and they get another chance of seeing, the different locations, presentations. So I would say yes.
We will also be sharing some of that information as part of the Food for Thought on Saturday morning when we start that hands-on session. We'll be talking through some visuals again to just kind of get people thinking kind of in the language that we think in and looking at and seeing the same things in those pictures that we're seeing. So we'll continue that process.
Great. And also, I just hope that I'm going to be attending as many of these as I can during the week, but I hope that the public does attend a few of them, and like you said, at least on the beginning one, the workshop, and maybe the ending, so that we, can get opinions and people can really let us know what they're thinking and how they want things to move forward.
That'd be
Thank
great.
you very much.
Okay, I'd like to give the rest of the time to staff and committee questions, and then questions from the public. Any staff or committee members have questions? And then questions from the public. Please come up to the podium. Keep your questions short so we can have long answers.
Lower Shriver, Snyder resident. I made a couple notes as we were listening to the presentation. First of all, the whole idea is to get the public to participate. Well, it's not the whole idea, but I think you would all like to see more public participation. The notice that was in the paper about the meetings today was so messed up. I really felt bad because this whole work session, or a lot of the work session, was going to be devoted to the presentation. If you've got people showing up at 6:45, that's unfortunate. The notes that I made, first of all, simplify the language. The use of words like charrette and nodes. I don't think most people know what in the world you're talking about. Simplify things. You're talking about a charrette. What in the world is a charrette? Workshop? Explanation session? Something. I'm quite sure I'm not the only one that doesn't really understand these things. Make it more resident friendly. As I say, charrette, node. What is a node? How does it refer to what you're trying to do here? The second thing regarding, again, participation by the public. There are a lot of citizen groups in the town of Amherst. Many of them have been formed as the result of things that were critical to a particular neighborhood. I'm quite sure that The clerk is aware of, just simply based on past records, that the clerk would be aware of who some of the folks are that are the leaders of these groups. And I think if those people might be notified as to what exactly is happening and a brief explanation, and the fact that it would be good if the people attended. This wasn't going to be a complaint session, but for information, I think that might bring more people out. It might not, but, maybe a few more than a handful. Excuse me. I also thought about possibly having some meetings in the vicinity of these various centers. I don't know if that's something that would be realistic, but it was just a thought that came to my mind. The meetings are all seemingly taking place at Harlem Road Community Center, which is in the southwest corner of the town. And I can't help but wonder if something were presented maybe in the north part of the town, if some of the folks would appreciate it. I'm not sure how many people are going to be traveling all the way down here. I mean, it's amazing what their rationalizations are. Another couple words, use space, what is it? Use space as opposed to form-based zoning. I mean, unless you're kind of involved with this stuff a little bit, what does that mean? Again, I think we need some simplified language. Not that people are stupid or anything like that, don't get me wrong, but these are all new terms. And I think that if people want to get more involved, they need to understand what is happening. I would like to thank Councilmember Sanders, I was going to say Stevens, Sanders, and also council members both for their comments. Steve, you particularly, about your comments about height restrictions and things. I think there are a lot of people that are more concerned with some specifics regarding that than things like the gun club. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
Public, Jane? Mary?
Could I respond to one small thing?
Sure.
And that is the public open houses are the only piece that we determined we could actually do. So the public open houses will be scattered around the town. So those are the Monday night session between 6 and 8. There'll be one held here at the Wyndham, but they'll be at some of the fire halls and other places around town. So we're going to try to make some effort to be out there in those nodes that we identified.
The way I understand it, these workshops are directed for public input, and I'm wondering what distinction will be made between getting input from homeowners versus input from the developers in town. Will the developers also be attending these workshops and formulating decisions on development, or is it going to be restricted to the residents?
So anybody with an interest in the community is welcome to attend, and that includes those who build and develop here. In a typical charrette setting, we don't see a whole lot of the development community during the development of the ideas, during the creation of them. Typically, we see them towards the end game. You'll see them here at the town board if they're unhappy. We intend to meet with them directly because they do provide a lot of insight into what is possible and not possible in your market here. And so we will be speaking both to the general public about the options and to the development community.
Mary, would you like to say anything? After Mary? Dal. Just giving you a warning, notice.
Just assumed I wanted to talk, huh? Well, my major concern is that most of these are already built out areas. They've already been urbanized in a way, and they're not greenfield development. What we find happens is that, these codes are going to be reformed, and then we're going to find that other commercial centers that are visualized later are going to be rezoned to these categories, and we're going to get things we never imagined were going to be in those areas. And they're going to have environmental challenges in terms of wetlands and conservation, and maybe the code will cover that, maybe it won't. So in terms of transferability, I'd like to see more environmentally challenged properties included, so that some of that could be transferable also. I also wonder how it jives with seeker.
I'm not sure if there's an answer to that.
You're exactly right that almost all of these are built-up sites, and so there are very limited environmental challenges associated with the built-up sites, with the exception that they potentially generate new environmental impacts, of course. But at present, we don't have any substantial wetland or other even creek edge or anything like that. I don't think we have any sites that are like that, so we'll think about that a little bit. The interplay with seeker is, of course, in the approval of every development. There is a review, and that review will continue. It's state law. It's a requirement. So nothing will change about the seeker process in relation to these
Thank you.
developments.
Dal? Like to say a few words? Yeah, just a few.
My name is Dal Giuliani. I'm chairman of the working committee for this project. The project is very sensitive to all the things that we already talked about. The proximity of residences to commercial has been an issue in this town as long as I've lived here. And that's one of the things we're deeply concerned about. So although we're concentrating on commercial development, we're very sensitive to the need to consider the surroundings to all this development. I don't think we're going to answer every question, and we're not going to resolve every issue that comes up. That's what we have a planning board for, and that's what we have a town board for. But I think we have an opportunity here to be able to move forward and maybe mitigate some of the problems that may come up, as we have had problems in the past. The working committee has been very diligent in trying to be as neutral as possible on site selection, keeping in mind that the various selections that we make are representative of what we hope to accomplish going forward. We tried to stay away from, Steve, to your question, issues that were long-standing issues in the town. We didn't think it was really our place to get involved in those, although it was suggested on more than one occasion that we become involved in one or two selections of sites that maybe would have had some ramifications. We chose not to do that. The guidance that we've gotten from Code Studio and from staff has been excellent in trying again to keep us middle of the road on all this. So when we went out on the bus tours, both as a working committee and also when we went out with the public, we tried to look at as many different opportunities that we saw going forward without concentrating in one particular neighborhood around one particular site, type of site selection. When you look at the opportunities that were in town, I mean, we could have chose to look at Maple Road and Sheridan Drive and Sweet Home Drive. That's a deep parcel, okay, we talked about it, we discussed it. We discussed east of the village. So I think Ramona will agree to the fact that the night that we had the discussion, it was pretty extensive and it went on. And very frankly, I got to the point where I had to limit some of the discussion because it was just time. But we tried to be as neutral as we could on all of this. We tried to look at it very objectively. We hope that when we get done with this, we will have answered a substantial number of questions that exist in town today as far as the way we develop. But we know we're not going to answer everything. Again, that's why we still have a planning staff, that's why we still have a planning department, and we still have a town board. So we hope to make a substantial dent in it, but I don't think it will completely resolve everything that comes up. The town has done a great job in funding this, okay? I told you, Barry, you asked. I'm never brief, you know that. The town board has done an excellent job in funding part of this because this is really looking forward into the future, and hopefully because of what the town of Amherst is going to do, there'll be other municipalities around us that will be coming to us and asking us how do we deal with it, and maybe it'll help them too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well received. Jim, and then we'll have one more speaker after Jim.
Jim Turcoli, Port Columbia Drive. The first thing that caught my eye was when the gentleman from Texas said about our new amendment that we voted on. And after looking for it, I had difficulty finding it, but I think Steve was the one and somebody else to go into our comprehensive plan and rip out the parts that made it difficult for people and very advantageous for developers. So I can understand why you did that, because you probably were told to. Very simple. And even though I think it'd be an excellent next supervisor, I still think you did that. That's kind of a cheap call. Now, when we first were lucky to get the grant, the big thing they said on the first page, get the public involved as much as you can. And what you ended up doing, picking fine people, 14, the only people who went to the meetings were the group that's basically 5 of us, and we are not allowed to ask questions. So that stuff that I'm not sure what his gentleman's name was, but he said about they answered questions, not from the public. They answered questions from their own committee. There were some gentlemen on the committee, two I went to, never asked anything. And when I went up to him, I said, "Why don't you ask the question?" "I don't understand it." Well, I can understand that if you sit, just like the lady in the black blouse said, it's complicated. The vocabulary is extremely complicated. Now, for example, South Long, nice street now, and it goes into California Street. So a lot of those townhouses have California addresses. Now that's like intrusion onto a neighborhood, in my opinion, but no one really cared or noticed it. I think what these group of 14, there's only 2 of them who know anything about what they want and what they want to get. The other ones are, you sit back there and you can't help from saying, what happened to them? Where's their brains?
Jim, they're all volunteers.
I thank you very much.
They're all volunteers. One more.
Ignorant and stupid.
One more speaker. Harold, would you have any questions? Would you have any questions, Harold? Okay. Anyone else?